Ladies and gentlemen, everyone around and in between, it is DebateSensei, where we talk about topics that are relevant to college level debate tournaments. This being the limited preparation edition of that. We have with us on our team is Tim Seavey from UCSD. no, CSU. I always screw up.
I do take offense.
Yeah, I thought I'd really just screw it up. From Utah State.
Of San Diego.
Yeah, of San Diego. All right. Oh, man, it's going to be a running theme there. And
I understand that typically our third partner, Matt, he told me that he needed to march his penguin. I don't know what that means, but he's out marching his penguin. So wish him luck.
Yeah, I think it takes about 30, 45 minutes, something like that. All right. We are trying a different sort of recurring theme here, and it's just going to be like a geopolitical addressing of areas of the world, a different one for each episode that we do of this one, and just look and see what's happening and sort of decipher what might be relevant for a debate student going to a tournament. Really, that's what the lens that we're looking through and trying to do that. And so, I did might even talk a little bit about how I approached looking at it, or how, Tim, you approached just that particular problem of, it's like, all right, how do you figure out what is relevant to a debate tournament in regards to Africa, So we're talking about Africa for this first one. We're just going to go alphabetical through the geopolitical global regions, and then we'll see where it takes us. All right.
I thought we were going by tectonic plates, but
yes. Oh, so that is a little thing. We had a discussion. It's like, how are we going to divide this up? And I think everyone's been taught the 7 continents, but I always thought it was kind of weird because Europe doesn't seem like a separate continent like the other ones do. You know what I mean? They seem like surrounded by large parts of water. They're the very small parts of land connecting them. You know what I mean? Clearly, and mostly those are like tectonic plates. But I'm like, are they on the same tectonic plates or not? I found that geologists kind of use the term Eurasia because it's basically all the same. Yeah, all that one big land area.
And to someone with dyslexia like me, geology and geography sometimes get a little bit blurry in there anyway. Yeah. So I think that we should use geology to determine where we're going after as far as the next geopolitical topic. Like that's the geopolitical. I'm using geology political. That's how I'm going after this.
No, you know what? That's fair. I kind of like that because, then it's just like Eurasia is going to be a massive one. Like, oh my God, there's just so much happening. I mean, there's just a lot of people. You know what I mean? It's like that's where, if you're including that entire tectonic plate, there are so many people with such different. It's like that's going to be a challenge, but challenge accepted.
We'll cover 20 different topics in our 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So on this one, though, we're starting with the first alphabetical tectonic plate. That is the African plate.
All right.
And those, topics that might come up. I've got to say, on the side of being a tournament director versus a competitor, pretty quickly realize how topics come to be. I never really thought about it as a competitor. I was like, oh, well, the magical gods that run Tab Room just have these brilliant ideas, and they come down from the heavens with these topics. And like, sometimes they're bad, but it's still like some kind of nameless, faceless, like, I don't know where topics really come from. Now seeing that it's like, it's whoever has the most time 2 days before the tournament because they forgot. that's who's doing it. Like whoever, raised their hand last has to come up with a bunch of topics for tournaments. And when it comes to things like extemp, when you're coming up with, 75 topics, like that gets pretty tiring to then be like, all right, and now into parley topics, or now into IPDA, when you need to come up with 30, for a regular round. So trying to get topics that have ground on multiple sides, that are relevant, that have, potential sources that are not going to spark up really, messy debates. Like that's a real challenge. So I tip my cap to those tournament directors that do come up with good topics. Fortunately, we've got a little AI buddy named ChatGPT that's very good at helping us come up with topics here. So what are some of the Africa topics so far that you've seen that would be, maybe potentially finding their way into debate tournaments near us?
Yeah, so like really quick, I can really quickly explain. I decided to use ChatGPT. I decided to use Google generative AI. I got a little advanced sort of exposure to that, and I just went to Google News and I put in Africa or African, and like just to see what comes up. And then, maybe out of the Google results, I found maybe like 3 or 4 things. But with the ChatGPT and Google generative AI, they had very similar responses, really, really similar.
That's surprising to me because ChatGPT was supposedly taken offline in 21, and Bard is
Mhm.
supposed to still be actively like pulling from anything new.
Yeah.
I would assume that like the Bard topics would be very, very different and new, but
Yeah,
I
I
guess
thought so. I thought so, but they look really similar, and so it just kind of shows you like the limits of AI.
sure.
It's like, yeah, it was amazing, but then when you start kind of getting used to it, I don't know. It
Mhm.
seems like it follows the same pattern of most technology advancements that I've seen in my lifetime, where people get really, really excited, but then they realize what the limitations are. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's helpful. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, all right, cool. Anyways, so I think it might be a good idea to kind of start with the whole continent and then maybe go into some of the more like regional issues,
Okay.
specifically talking about how um, uh, the African Union, I think,
Sure.
or UN action or policy toward Africa, or like sort of like international.
Transnational. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, transnational. I like that one. Um,
All right, so fire away. What do you like so far?
well, like there was a question there. There was like the role of the African Union in promoting democracy and stability, effective
Mhm.
or inadequate. I'm like, I don't
I
know.
feel like that ends up becoming like a fact round where
Yeah.
like you can just start taking
Okay.
examples versus examples of like where's the African Union attempted to promote democracy, where's it been successful, where's it failed, which one, lands the furthest on either side of the extreme, and then start, hashing that out.
Okay, I think glad you brought that up because I started noticing that a lot of the topics I was like thinking of in my head seemed to be um, resolutions of conjecture or fact resolution, right?
Mhm.
Where you're trying to predict. And maybe one of the reasons is because I'm really hesitant to like say the United States should get more involved in Africa. The UN
Yep.
should be more involved in Africa or some sort of version of that.
Mhm.
But like to be honest, like I'm kind of at a loss beyond that, and so like
How do you feel about fiating entities that are not your typical state of California should, USFG should, United Nations should, but like the African Union should do the following thing? How do you feel
yeah,
about those resolutions? I've seen really interesting debates on either side of like we should never fiat an entity over which like we have absolutely no control and never will, and other debates that are like we should not only be talking about the USFG as our only actor. That's similarly like regionalist and kind of not ethnocentric, but like it becomes a very myopic view of like what the bigger picture, what the world may be,
I
and we're all supposed to be
yeah,
playing pretend in debate land anyways.
I don't really give fiat a whole lot of weight in debate because I think there's such a simpler way to think about it. Is that whenever we have a debate with somebody, if you're talking with somebody and it's not a formal debate, but it is about um, some sort of international agency or even some other country, you're like,
Mhm.
you'd say like Brexit, right? It's like, man, they really should not leave Brexit. You're not you made an argument. You can and you didn't need fiat to do it.
Mhm.
So I don't know why we even need fiat. You know what I mean? Like that's my long answer for that stuff. Yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with somebody saying, I think the African Union would be best if they took this line of action, and that's the
Yeah.
thesis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
I'm down with that. I think that like debate is still a fun, like it's not meant to be like, okay, let's really super practically flush these things through. Like I think it's
right.
meant to be a debate. It's a word game. Like let's compare some ideas and talk about this theoretically. And
Hmm.
it is a like safe space for new ideas. And some like they'll certainly get shot down. So it's certainly not safe for the ideas, but it is a good place to test things out without everything having to be like you're the perfect agent for it and you're the perfect, body to make this claim on it.
Hmm.
I have heard arguments on the other side that are also pretty decent, saying like if we get to use a Western-centric position to put forth action through another body that's kind of like, fiating that Kim Jong-un will dismantle his entire nuclear armament. Like, it's not really a fair fiat, like, to say that this group would do such a thing, but whatever. Moving past that, we've got a whole bunch of topics, starting off with like the really big ones. So if we did do like the AU has been successful or not successful in promoting democracy, I feel like that comes down to a fact round. If instead it were something like the African Union should, subsidize election materials or something like that, or offer security and election, support mechanisms to promote democracy in this particular country or in these particular countries, that might be a more like tangible, real malleable topic that you can dig into a little bit more,
Right.
because you can start talking about what the gaps are, like what prevents a nation from going through a democratic changeover, and is the AU the right actor to implement that?
Yeah, what I'm noticing is that a lot of stuff I'm looking up, if I'm going to use Africa-related information in my debates, it might be more on like disadvantage level, impact level analysis. So it might be more of a neg strategy than an affirmative. It's not so many, like it doesn't like the topics that are coming up are, either African Union doing something, right? UN doing something, or conjecture about the future. And so like one of the fact rounds was about like China's investment in Africa. What's that going to mean for the future type of thing? Like
I love that one. So that was a major public forum topic 2 years ago.
Oh, really?
Really, really good. So the Belt and Road Initiative is the particular policy that China puts forth that they've invested, like, I don't know that it's a T, but I thought it was somewhere in the range of $1 trillion is their plan on like, we're going to create roads and better infrastructure throughout the world, starting with Africa. And there is a whole lot of messiness to that, because it's like, look, here's investment that is going to make life better for people that don't have access to, X, Y, and Z things. And, schools, hospitals, roads, any manner of commerce, like look at what this, just having good roads will do. And at the same time, all of these loans are, because it's not gifts, they are loans that come with like unbelievable interest rates and are like virtually impossible ever to pay back. Like the amounts of money that are being loaned are like greater than the GDP of the country or something like that. So it's just like insane, kind of profiteering of saying like, okay, great, you're going to get all these things, and then you will forever be in debt to the PRC. Like that becomes a real, trade-off. It's like, okay, well, does that actually maybe create safety, where like a world that's tied together through economic means, like, debts and owing money, is less likely to maybe go to war over one that's just like trying to fight back and forth between resources? Like maybe that actually is preferable, like, compared to, on the other hand, you get no economic tie and no infrastructure. So which one is the better trade-off? Like it feels like it's a, which one is the worst of two evils? But like one of them at least like improves quality of life.
That kind of feeds into a critical discussion. I think it would be a good segue. When I was a debater, was pretty, well, not necessarily popular, but it was called the Gift Kritik. And it was it was nice to have the outlines of a story anytime somebody proposed a large sort of aid package, right, with no strings attached, or even loans, or like, so I think that this criticism where like the hospitality, showing a level of hospitality is also at the same time a sign of power, right? That that you're able to grant somebody else, and now the relationship that creates is one of servitude, and so so it was a really good discussion to have when somebody was really going hard for something that was altruistic and just inherently good, no disadvantages whatsoever. It's like, all right, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about this. And so it really kind of forces. And I think that happens. I think that would happen a lot on Africa related topics, because a lot of them tend to be around aid packages, right? For instance, recent coups in in Africa has kind of put difficult, positions for like the U.S. president and things. So what is it? The in Niger, the recent Niger coup, and so whether or not we call it a coup determines whether or not the United States is legally allowed to give them aid. And so the White House is really reluctant to call what happened in Niger a coup because they want to have this relationship. They want to have aid packages going out to them. And if they call it a coup, they can't give money to the new government.
Interesting. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is where you might be able to end up diving. Those are examples, I think, of topics that like might be very regionally specific, and so like you need to be up on just this particular country and like their political, who are the players in it or something. So it's kind of like extemp at that point of just digging deep.
That's probably one of the best topics I found. Right, that the United States federal government should declare Niger a coup,
and therefore not send aid money.
Like, you don't even have to say the consequences of that. It's the debater's job to do that. But like that it could be the topic. That could be a really easy resolution right there.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Other super specific ones that I thought were fairly cool. The brain drain was another one. So this was larger. So this is not a single nation, but to say, should African governments implement policies to retain skilled workers? So this, I think, probably can end up backing your way into like Belt and Road Initiative type stuff, where it's like, all right, you've got universities around Africa that are producing very smart, capable, skilled workers, and those people immediately jet out to BRICS countries or the U.S. or Western Europe. What can be done to like retain that capability, because that ends up being a huge problem, right? As soon as like investments in education happen, that's great. But if the fruits of that investment don't stay local, then the benefits are kind of nil. Like at best, the university does well, and that's kind of it. So the long-standing impacts of investments in education don't tend to stay in that region. So I think that's kind of I don't know how one would actually pass policy on that, though. Like, what kind of policy would keep skilled workers close?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of the development programs that the African Union is doing, like that. That's all that I could think of. Where I don't know. It would be
like a tariff on countries that offer like skilled worker visas. Like, if you give an H-1B visa to our person, we will fine you or something like that. Like, I don't know how likely that is. Like, just what position a country.
Yeah. Like, again, it's like employee. I don't know.
I mean, there could be like government subsidies to private companies for skilled labor positions. So like, hospitals or whatever that require people with advanced technical degrees, say like, or research facilities or something like that, get additional government grants just for the purpose of salary. So it's not into, tech or hardware or whatever. It's just into giving your people better, like more money to stay. Like, that's maybe one way to do it. I suppose you could probably get there through like benefits programs and things as well, of like trying to be more competitive on the job market, but like keeping that close. Yeah, but it seems like it's mostly punitive. Like, you can offer a bunch of advantages to try and stay, but then like, how are you going to, penalize someone for leaving? Like, not.
I mean, there would have to be, I don't know, there like some massive investment in R&D on something, you know what I mean, like to attract people. That would, I don't know, incentives. But
so another topic that I found to be, I think, the one that I would want to debate the most, so if it were IPDA, the thing that I would strike last, is, should African countries nationalize the extraction industries? So talking about mining.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. I thought that would be probably one of the most interesting. It would probably be better if you like picked a specific place. So I want to say it's like Mozambique has like a ton of rare earth mineral mines. I might be totally wrong on that, but there exist a lot of rare earth minerals and like, things that are necessary for batteries. So a lot of, aluminum, tin. So things that are important for construction, manufacturing, electronics, come from mines that are in Africa. And so talking about nationalizing those mines, this becomes really interesting. So one, it can become this landmine area where you're like, mining companies are really evil, so let's like take the power out of their hands. But at the same time, like, do we know that the government is going to be less evil, or the government is going to do a better job of managing this and like making safe work conditions, or potentially shutting it down, right? So you could also even say that like these mines are awful, governments will shut them down. So like by nationalizing the extraction process, it will become unfeasible to continue making mines in Africa and like talk about the environmental impacts or something. That would be a tricky one, because either you're advocating for how to do mining better, maybe you get a little bit of advantage, but you definitely have some nasty disadvantages that have to stick. You just have to grant those links of like, mining is one of the worst things we can do for the planet. And then, or you say like, all right, the governments would shut down mines, or they would at least, significantly limit extraction businesses. But then you start to get kind of, I feel like that's effects topical, like trying to say like, well, we should send it to the government because we can assume that the governments will do X, Y, and Z things, and therefore grant solvency.
I don't know. Like, I mean, if it's the shortest route, you know what I mean? Like,
if a government has explicitly stated like, we do not want mining in our country, and like if it were up to us, we would shut them down, that feels like it's a fair enough link. You can say like, all right, sweet, so we nationalize it, and that is shutting it down because the government said on this, like that would be fair. But if the government hasn't made it clear that they would shut down a mine, and your expectation is like, oh, mining will go down, or there will be less mining, or there'll be like less pollution or whatever, that feels like a lot of expectation, or that is a lot of hope that is put on how a national entity would oversee a mine versus the private entity. Maybe it would do better, but like I don't know how many examples of that there are where it would go better run by a state entity instead of a private one.
Yeah.
But I think that'd be a really fun one, just because I think mining is like one of the less sexy energy debates that needs to be had more often. Like just every kind of like magical wave the magic wand and like green tech saves the planet. Almost all of that relies on like the worst kinds of mining and like gnarliest places to get these materials from, and like just the shipping process to get stuff around the world. Like we get a ton of our, lithium from Australia. It's like Australia is really far from all of the places that want, batteries and, power plants and things like that, or like, lithium storage facilities, whatever. So that it gets tricky there. And I think it's a fun thing to have.
Those are good sort of ideas about like how to write the topics and what sort of plan texts that you can have. But like I said at the beginning, like a lot of my mind starts wandering toward using this as sort of good impact analysis for disadvantages, right? Like when you're thinking about like mining and environmentalism and stuff like that, I saw you pointed out the Green Wall Initiative. And like I'm like thinking like, okay, how would that be a topic? It might not be a topic other than like the Green Wall Initiative won't work, like conjecture, right? I mean, a fact-based debate. But the Green Wall Initiative could be a uniqueness story on a climate change disadvantage, you know what I mean? And like about how and what will happen specifically to Africa. I also found that like of the 20 countries that will be worst hit by climate change, like 17 of them are African, I think.
Wow.
And so and this is like one thing they're trying to do to save it. And so like I think having impacts on like a large region like Africa with a story like that is compelling,
Agreed. Yeah, I think that's a worth. Well, so maybe unpack a little bit more what you mean about making that the uniqueness story. Like, is that on the assumption that if we were to do this and it were to work, this is what would happen?
Yeah. So like the Green Wall Initiative is this really big transnational project to reclaim a lot of desert land. And so they're kind of vague about what they're doing about it, but like replenishing growth and trying to like make a forest out of the desert basically. and so, and they have this broad stroke that they're trying to do. It's getting off to a slow start. So the uniqueness story is about how fragile this project is right now. And
I
so
see. Okay.
yeah, and so whatever you do is going to turn the Green Wall Initiative into a failure, which is one of the only things that might solve Africa's issues. And so like you're basically
Got it.
yeah.
Okay, that's an interesting avenue to go. Another one that was in that similar vein was talking about Africa's youth bulge. So the topic opportunity for growth or a crisis in the making. By the way, I know most of these topics actually read more like extemp questions, and I will absolutely be stealing them as extemp questions from my students.
That's
So
good. That's fair.
Like they're less like here's solid ground for two different sides to duke this thing out, and kind of like one person make a decision and go with that.
Yeah.
And then it's typically more fact focused, which lends itself to extemp. But so on Africa's youth bulge, and they're saying like this is an opportunity or a crisis in the making. So there are some interesting parallels that come into states in the past that were either like really famine ridden or like war torn, or where there were huge, even on the opposite side of it, like huge population growths. So when there was a huge amount, like a large overwhelming percentage of the population was young, stories of those things going really well or really terribly. So again, it kind of lends itself to a fact round. You're like, here's a couple of examples on either side. And it's either like when there don't exist enough opportunities, when there don't exist enough, structured here are like career paths. So it like ends up forcing the economy to go through, huge changes and things. It's not equipped for. Those people either leave or stuff starts to go really sideways because like young people that don't have a particular direction and don't have much opportunity, like it can start going really, south really quickly. And there are some kind of historical examples of what that looks like. So like Afghanistan in the 80s, the average age was 17. Like after the war with Russia, like so many Afghan people were killed in that war that just anyone that was kind of age, like adult males of age, a ton of them died. So the average age becomes super, super young. And that ends up setting up all kinds of things like, what happened in the early 2000s. Again, so those are like, kind of gnarlier routes. But then you also look at like India, similar in like the 60s and 70s, where like you get this huge population boom as it starts to become more industrialized. And then like really great things start to happen. So, the technology industry really takes off. And so there are different avenues where you could go with that. So I think that's just a fun one to talk about, because I don't think that like age, like demographic spread gets its way into debate all that often, of like what happens when populations are older or younger, and like what does the future look like. And that's an interesting one happening with China, where like China's getting older, but okay, if a lot of Africa is getting younger, there are more people or more younger people than old. Like, what does that look like? So I think those kinds of models end up being interesting debates.
Yeah, they're like I said, they're an interesting topic, but it's like the conjecture part of it. It's like, yeah, this is going to happen or that's not going to happen.
Totally.
It does kind of, and I think that's okay for a debate, but I don't know if I'd be writing topics like that. I can't. I'm not seeing. And it might just be our news sources aren't really dialed into. You know what I mean? I really think that might be it, where it's just kind of like, all right, this is what's happening in Africa, and it's either like international involvement, or is like the more recent one I saw was about like all the number of coups that have been happening in Africa. I mentioned Niger, but Reuters pointed out that in the last 20 years, like they've had a noticeable increase in the number of coups and that's why like China investment has been decreasing. And so like one of the thoughts was like, all right, so have they bottomed out, or is there going to be more? Because that's one of the debates is like, okay, is this going to turn into a contagion where it's just going to keep on spreading and more of these nations are going to have these military coups, or is it largely over?
Yeah, so I think interesting you ask like why it is that some of these topics come up with like just expectations of conjecture. Just what do you think will happen? could be that, like you said, there just are not that many journalists, or at least like Western journalists that are there publishing stuff. So one of the things we actually just had this conversation on Monday night at debate practice, talking to the extempers about finding local sources. So the closer you can get to, a local thing. So if you can find like the Lagos Times, that probably will have more legit, up-to-date information about Nigeria than like BBC. Like maybe it will, or like The Economist or something. Like the further away the news source gets, the less likely it is that they've got like local, up-to-date information. So trying to find really local sources, I think that's a fun, if you're in the position of a tournament director trying to come up with topics, that's one way to do it. But I think as a debater, that's probably what I would do as well, is let the other side come up with their, very Western, like, tell me, what does CNN say Africa's about to do? And then come back and like, it's interesting you say that because the Lagos Times says this. And it's like, and just being able to compare authenticity of sources, or like the proximity of sources is one way for it. And then you can get a little bit less conjectural and start talking about like, this is what the actual situation is. So just like, some link turns basically of like, this is not the way that something currently is, and here's why the opposite is going to happen, or something like that.
Yeah, I'm just not seeing a whole lot of policy topics outside of like intervention and some like
a lot of intervention ones that involve the UN for sure. When it's like, and anytime using UN peacekeepers to get her done in the way that like hard power USFG plans typically go, are just absolute messy. Like, because there's there's like no teeth to them. Like there's not really the same way that the US would do something. And also then it also gets even significantly worse, where there's all kinds of instances of like UN peacekeepers going in, and then human trafficking happens, like skyrockets in that country months after UN peacekeepers are sent to take over a situation. Like that seems like causation, not just correlation. And there's all kinds of awful things. So I think those debates tend not to get off the ground before they start, and they probably shouldn't. Like that's not what a UN peacekeeper is meant to do. So I think that fortunately, like those debates tend to get shut down quickly, but that just means if you get those resolutions, you got to think of something more creative than just like go nation build the way that some novice rounds are kind of set up.
Yeah. All right. Well, I look forward to the next one that we do. And now that we're doing the tectonic plates, I'm not exactly sure what that's going to be. So we'll get back to it and we'll check it out. Right. All right. Hey, it's Tim and Jared with DebateSensei. We'll see you next time.
Talked about Antarctica next.
Oh, is that it?